Let's assume that we've decided to engage in some direct action, following Martin Luther King's model, as described in the previous video. We've identified an injustice, and we can demonstrate that the injustice exists. We've attempted to negotiate for a peaceful way out of this injustice into a state of justice, and we've been rebuffed. And we have made ourselves ready to engage in direct action. So now is the time for direct action. When we talk about direct action, what are we talking about? Well, according to King, we're going to bother people. Some people take King's devotion to nonviolence as a dedication to quiet and peaceful expressions of disapproval. According to that conception, King sought to appeal to the conscience of the majority population and attempt to persuade them to give up their unjust ways. But that's not correct. Here is what King said, quote, "Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and establish such a creative tension that a community that has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue so that it can no longer be ignored." End quote. King later adds the following, quote, "The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation." End quote. The type of nonviolent direct action that King has in mind is coercive. Furthermore, King does not expect that people long accustomed to power, unjustly acquired and administered, to quietly give it up when presented with a calm and patient, well-reasoned argument. He wrote, quote, "History is the long and tragic story of the fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily." End quote. So in what way does King intend to bother people? Well, consider the lunch counter sit-ins. Going into a segregated restaurant and sitting at the counter, which is reserved for whites only. Doing so in the busiest part of the day, creating a disturbance. Well, that's bad for business. But it doesn't happen just once. Those people get arrested. They get hauled off to jail. But then the next day, somebody else shows up. And then the next day, it's somebody else. And the business is forced to confront the issue of segregation. The march that Dr. King was arrested for leading happened on Easter weekend. Well, why Easter weekend? Well, according to Dr. King, it's because it's the second busiest shopping day of the year. Let the businesses of downtown Birmingham feel the economic pinch of having a black demonstration through the business part of town on one of the busiest parts of the year. And again, the demonstrations keep happening until it has brought about change. A direct action campaign isn't a one-time event. It is literally a campaign. It's a commitment to participate in the effort day after day after day until the other side is worn down and pressured into change. So a direct action campaign will seek to disturb people to such a degree that it motivates change. But it's possible to take things too far. The 9/11 hijackers sought to create a disturbance and draw people's attention to what they perceived as an injustice and to motivate change. But they went too far. The Oklahoma bombers sought to draw people's attention to what they thought was an injustice, and they went too far. Many mass shooters and terrorists are seeking to draw people's attention to a cause and motivate change, but their methods are considered less than legitimate. So there's this range of acts that one can perform that's consistent with creating a disturbance, drawing people's attention, and motivating change. On one side, we can put whispering your discontent to your cat. This might disturb the cat, though the cat's unlikely to take steps to correct the problem. On the other side, we can put the 9/11 attacks and mass shootings and terrorist bombings. Somewhere between these two, there's a line. Cross that line, and you've taken your protest too far. So for King, what is too far? Where is that line? Dr. King addressed that issue when he considered the following objection. Dr. King wrote, quote, "You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools, it's rather strange and paradoxical to find us consciously breaking laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? End quote. Well, according to King, the line is drawn between just and unjust laws. If a law is unjust, then it can be broken. But just laws must be obeyed. In Dr. King's words, quote, "The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all." End quote. There are a couple of arguments for this. If you claim to be fighting for justice, then you must avoid injustice. If your protests commit unjust acts, such as killing nearly 3,000 innocent people in the 9/11 attacks, you can hardly portray yourself as soldiers fighting for justice. Or another argument, unjust laws command people to do what ought not to be done. There's no wrong in being committed to refusing to do what ought not to be done, whereas just laws command people to do what ought to be done, what justice requires. It is wrong to refuse to do what justice requires, to act unjustly. We can evaluate this thesis by seeing how it applies to a few test cases. For example, is it reasonable to expect that a just society would have laws that prohibit people from hijacking airplanes and flying them into buildings? If the answer is yes, then hijacking airplanes and flying them into buildings goes too far. Is it reasonable to expect that a just society would have laws that prohibit people from breaking into stores and houses and running off with the contents, or setting those stores and houses on fire? If yes, then looting and arson counts as going too far. Is it reasonable to expect that a just society would have laws that prohibit blacks from sitting at the lunch counter or require that they sit at the back of the bus? If the answer is no, then these laws can be broken. Now, Dr. King was arrested for parading without a permit. What does King say about a law that requires people to obtain a permit before they have a parade or a protest march? What King said was the following, quote, "There is nothing wrong with an ordinance which requires a permit for a parade," end quote. Okay, now since requiring a permit for a protest march is just law, then it ought to be obeyed. So what happened? Well, SCOTUS Watch reports what happened as follows. Quote, "On April 3rd, Shuttlesworth," that's Fred Shuttlesworth, one of the local organizers, sent Lola Hendricks, the secretary of a local civil rights organization, and the Reverend Ambus Hill of the Lily Grove Baptist Church to the office of City Commissioner Bull Connor to request a permit to parade or demonstrate on the sidewalks of Birmingham. Connor, an avowed segregationist, responded, "No, you will not get a permit in Birmingham, Alabama to picket. I will picket you over to the city jail," end quote. So the law requiring a permit was just law, but the denial of the permit was unjust. The purpose of a permit is to help the city to prepare for the event. It's not a tool to be used by the city to decide who may speak and who may not. So this is consistent with King's claim that somebody whose main goal is to promote justice can violate unjust laws or the unjust enforcement of just laws. However, they cannot legitimately commit an injustice. This still leaves open the question of how to determine if the law one is breaking is an unjust law or an unjust enforcement of a just law. We'll take that question up in the next video.